There are ways of growing old that may seem peaceful on the surface, but in reality, they push people into a life that feels like a shadow still breathing, but the fire is gone. Some choices we make in our later years seem to come from a place of peace, of love, of hoping to have someone by our side each day. But then one day you realize that very choice has turned the rest of your life into a string of stifling, lonely days. So much so that you start asking yourself, is this really living? No one ever teaches us how to live when our hair turns grey, when our children are grown, and we begin to step back. But that does not mean we should let old age pass us by in a way that slowly strips us of our worth. In today's video, I want to share with you a true story, one that is raw, real, and close to home, about a woman who gave up her independence only to feel like an object passed around between the people she loved the most. And from that, I want to tell you this. In old age, do not choose a way of living that forces you to suffer in silence, because at that point, it might feel like dying is easier than living. Make sure to watch until the end of the video, because I believe that somewhere in this story, you might see yourself, or someone you deeply love. And sometimes just one moment of reflection is enough to change everything. Before we begin, leave a comment with a positive affirmation like, "I will live my later years fully with no regrets," or any statement that makes you feel stronger. And do not forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you will not miss meaningful content that helps you live a healthier and happier life every single day. And now, let us step into this thought-provoking story where even the smallest details will show you just how one wrong decision in old age can completely change your life. Mrs. Helen was a 70-year-old woman who used to be an elementary school teacher. She spent her life quietly dedicated to her work, raising generations of students to become good people. She lived simply and with discipline, always putting her love for her family at the center of everything. But shortly after entering retirement, the greatest loss of her life struck. Her husband of many decades passed away after a serious illness. From that moment on, the little home that once echoed with children's laughter and warm family dinners suddenly turned cold and empty. She felt lost even within the very place she had called home all her life. Her 2 children were grown with stable jobs and families of their own, but they lived hundreds of miles away. They still called, they still cared, but those short conversations were not enough to fill the growing emptiness inside an aging mother's heart. As the years went by, she felt time slipping away more quickly, while her strength seemed to fade with each step. On stormy nights, lying alone in her big bed, she sometimes found herself overwhelmed with fear. What if she collapsed in the middle of the night? Who would know? Who would ask the simple question, "Mom, are you okay?" After many sleepless nights, Mrs. Helen made a life-changing decision. She sold the house that had been her home for a lifetime. The place filled with memories of joy and sorrow, and divided the money equally between her 2 children. No one asked her to, and no one suggested it. It was a decision born from a mother's boundless love, and a sincere belief that, if I give with love, my children will respond with care. From that day on, she began a new chapter of life, a mobile life, a few months at her son's house. Then she would move to her daughter's. She told herself, "I no longer have my own house, but as long as I am with family, anywhere can be home." In her mind, her presence would not only ease her own loneliness, but also bring warmth and connection to the whole family. At first, the idea of living with her children seemed peaceful and full of love. But just a few weeks into her stay at her son's house, Mrs. Helen began to feel something quietly draining her sense of freedom. In the beginning, her son welcomed her warmly with open arms. He said, "Mom, just rest. Let us take care of everything." She was touched. After so many lonely months, her heart felt comforted again. That first dinner, in the new home with everyone gathered around the table, she thought, maybe I made the right choice. But not long after, the little things in everyday life began to quietly create cracks. One afternoon, she wanted to cook her old chicken soup recipe, a dish the whole family used to love when her children were young, but her daughter-in-law gently stopped her. "Mom let me handle the cooking. We're used to doing things a bit differently now." Mrs. Helen smiled and nodded without saying more. But deep inside, she felt a tightness in her chest, like something precious had been taken away, though she could not quite name it. From that moment on, mealtime no longer felt like a joy. No one excluded her, but she often waited until everyone had finished eating before quietly serving herself. Not because anyone pushed her aside, but because she did not want to be a burden or inconvenience anyone. That silent habit made her presence in the house gradually fade into the background. In her spare time, she tried turning on the television to watch old black and white movies tied to her memories of youth. But before she could sit down, her grandson wrinkled his nose and said, "Grandma, this movie is boring. There is no color at all." She stayed silent, turned the TV off, and over time she stopped turning it on altogether. The small joy it once brought became yet another reason for her to retreat into herself. The feeling of losing her autonomy became even more real when she realized she no longer had any finances of her own. In the past, she could freely buy a book, a bag of tea, or some supplements whenever she needed them. But now, after giving all the money from the house sale to her children, she had nothing left. Every time she needed medicine or simply wanted a small treat like some cookies, she hesitated. She had to ask. Her son and daughter-in-law never said no, but she felt uncomfortable, like she was becoming dependent. She realized it was not just age that was making her feel weak, it was the loss of control over her own life. Then one evening, while the whole house was asleep, she was still downstairs tidying up the kitchen. A soft voice from the next room floated through the walls, unintentionally reaching her ears. "It is hard having Mom live here all the time. I feel like we do not have our own space anymore." Her hands froze. The dish towel slipped from her fingers onto the table. She stood motionless, like she had turned to stone. There was no anger, no blame. Just a long, heavy silence that echoed deep within her aging heart. In that moment, she came to a painful realization: no matter how much love there is when you lose your independence, even your children's affection can slowly turn into mere tolerance. That feeling was like a quiet blade, no blood, but cutting straight to the soul. And from then on, she began to ask herself, is this really the life she had hoped for? After all the silent pain at her son's home, Mrs. Helen moved in with her daughter, holding on to a little hope that a mother's love would be enough to ease her weariness. But reality turned out to be quite different from what she had imagined. The first few days at her daughter's house were fairly peaceful. The atmosphere felt a bit more comfortable compared to where she had been before. Her son-in-law was polite and kind, always greeting her and lending a hand whenever she needed it. Her daughter was the same gentle, thoughtful, always considerate. Mrs. Helen felt a small weight lift off her heart. Not because she was treated differently, but simply because she no longer felt watched or tiptoed around like she did at her son's house. She could speak her mind without the fear of being interrupted or labelled as outdated. She began to spend her time helping out around the house, waking up early to make breakfast, brewing coffee, sweeping the floors, doing the laundry, all out of a quiet desire to share the load with a young family raising a child. She did not wait to be asked. If something needed doing, she simply did it. Not to earn favour, but because she believed, as long as I still have strength, I should be useful. But little by little, these small efforts began to turn into a growing gap. She would remind her granddaughter to study just how she dressed, or gently suggest that her daughter be more careful with the child's meals. These were words of love, the same way she had always cared for her own children. But times had changed. One evening at dinner, her daughter said softly, "Mom just let us raise our own kid. Every family has its own way, you know." The words were gentle, but the look in her eyes had changed. It was no longer the gaze of a daughter who sought her mother's advice. From that day on, Mrs. Helen began to speak less. She stopped offering suggestions, stopped asking questions. Slowly, she learned to retreat to become a quiet shadow in a house that was not truly hers. Then one afternoon, her granddaughter, upset after being told to study, blurted out, "Are you going to stay here forever? Grandma, why don't you go back to your own house?" The words came like a bolt of lightning across a late afternoon sky. The room instantly fell into silence. Her daughter looked at the child, ready to scold her, but then only sighed. Mrs. Helen simply smiled faintly and blinked as if it was nothing. But deep down, those words were like a cold, clean cut. Because she knew the most painful thing is not being asked to leave, but realizing there is nowhere left to return to. That night, she sat alone in silence for a long time. She did not blame her grandchild. She was not angry with her daughter. She simply came to a quiet understanding there are limits that love cannot cross, especially when you no longer have a place to call your own. The next morning, she quietly packed a few sets of clothes into a bag. No one noticed. No tears. No complaints. She just left just as silently as she had given her whole life, never asking for anything in return. Mrs. Helen eventually found a small apartment on the outskirts of the city. It was not spacious or modern like her children's homes, but it had sunlight, peace, and most importantly, it was hers. Her monthly retirement benefits were not much, but with careful budgeting, she could live comfortably. She did not have to ask anyone for money, nor wait for someone's permission to do what she wanted. From then on, she began to relearn how to live for herself. Simple meals she cooked with her own hands, no one criticized, no one corrected. Every morning, she did a few yoga stretches to keep her joints flexible. In the afternoon, she read books, jotted down thoughts in a journal, or simply sat by the window watching the sun fade. Occasionally, she joined gatherings for the elderly in her neighborhood, where she could chat, laugh, and feel like she still belonged to the world. Of course, there were still moments of loneliness. That was inevitable. But the difference now was she was alone by choice, not out of abandonment or dependency. No one controlled her schedule, her meals, her hobbies, or her thoughts. There were no more judgmental looks, no more words that quietly broke her heart. And that freedom, small as it might seem, became the very thing that made her feel truly happy in her old age. Mrs. Helen's story is not something we hear and then forget. It is meant for each of us, especially those stepping into old age, to take a deep, honest look at ourselves. Because the truth is, this growing old is not just about love and affection. More importantly, it is about maintaining your independence and dignity. The biggest mistake many elderly people make is not in loving their children too much, but in giving away everything they have, from their assets and decision-making power to the very place they call home, believing that love alone will keep everything together forever. So many fathers and mothers have chosen to sell the homes that meant everything to them and then split the money among their children. They do not do it because they are forced to. They do it because they think, if I show love, my children will show gratitude. But life does not always unfold the way our hearts hope. When you no longer have any assets, no longer have the power to choose sadly, you may also lose your voice and the respect you once had, even within your own family. Let us be honest, our children's love, no matter how deep, still has limits. Not because they do not care, but because they have lives of their own. They face pressures and struggles they do not always say out loud. And when you, an elderly parent, live in your child's home with no decision-making power, no financial resources of your own, you begin to fall into the role of someone who should be considerate, should not speak too much, should know their place. At that point, you are not living, you are merely enduring. Money is not the most important thing in life, but in old age, it is a tool that helps you stay in control. A personal savings fund means you do not have to rely on anyone. A small, modest house that belongs to you gives you the dignity of having your own space. The ability to choose even something as simple as what to eat or when to sleep makes you feel like your life still holds meaning. There are 3 things you absolutely should not give up as you grow older: money, a place to live, and the right to make your own choices. Lose one and life may become difficult. Lose all 3 and you may feel like an unwanted guest even in your own child's home. And here is something else. Family love needs space. Being close does not always mean caring. Constant presence does not always mean affection. Sometimes too much closeness makes the relationship feel suffocating. Your children need space for their families, for their own children. And you need your own space too. A place where you can live at your own pace in old age, slow, calm, but not lonely. Love your children, but do not place the weight of your entire life on their shoulders. Help support, but also know how to preserve your own sense of worth. Because if you do not protect your freedom and dignity, no one else can do it for you. Old age is not a burden, and it is certainly not a leftover part of life. It is a time to live more gently, to be kind to yourself, and above all, to live a life where you still feel like a person of value. If you are entering your twilight years, remind yourself aging is not a time for blind sacrifice. It is a time to live clearly, fully, and with deep self-respect. Do not rush to give away your assets, savings, or home while you are still healthy and mentally sharp. When you give everything, you may also lose the right to choose to live your way, and sometimes even the respect of those closest to you. Loving your family does not mean giving up everything. Love wisely and love yourself first. Give your children a portion of what you have as a gift of affection, but keep enough to take care of yourself. A savings fund for emergencies, a separate account for your own spending, or a small home so you always have a place to call your own. If you are thinking about living with your children, consider it carefully. Set clear expectations from the start on shared space, privacy, financial matters, and daily routines. Do not avoid conversations just to keep the peace, only to live in silence and emotional strain later. A good relationship needs clarity and mutual respect. If you have the means, choose to live independently. A small, easy-to-manage apartment near healthcare and essential services. Hire help if needed, or join local senior groups to connect and engage. Consider a respectful, well-run nursing home where elders are cared for and supported. Living independently does not mean being lonely. When you are free from dependence, you protect your dignity, confidence, and family relationships. Old age is not about enduring, it is about enjoying. You deserve to live with a voice, a presence, and a meaningful place in your own life. And above all, care for your physical and mental health. Move your body, breathe deeply, walk and eat well. Spend time doing what you love, reading, writing, gardening, listening to music, or reconnecting with friends. Joy often lives in small moments, if only we choose to notice them. And the most important thing, please never believe that old age is the leftover part of life. You still matter. You are still at the heart of your family, at the center of your own life. As long as you can wake up each morning, take a breath and make yourself a cup of tea, you still have the chance to live an old age full of dignity, purpose, and peace. Live like someone who deserves to be proud, not because you have sacrificed your whole life, but because you know how to protect yourself, value yourself, and live well until the very end. Old age in the end is not the conclusion. It is the final chapter where you have every right to choose what kind of ending you want to write for the long journey of your life. You can choose a lonely old age or one of peace, one of passivity or one of independence, one that fades quietly or one that is full of meaning. It all depends on the decisions you make starting today. If there is one thing you must remember clearly, it is this: never hand over your right to live to someone else, even to the people you love the most. Keep a space that is yours alone, to live, to breathe, and to simply be yourself, even when your hair turns grey and your back begins to bend. You are not living to please anyone. You are living to feel that you are still smiling each day in peace, in freedom, and in gratitude for this very life. If today's video touched something in your heart, please leave a comment below as a gentle yet powerful affirmation. I choose to live my later years fully and with purpose. Or share whatever words help you feel stronger and more uplifted after watching this video. And if you found this message meaningful, share it with others, especially with those who are entering their twilight years, so they too have the chance to live differently, to live better. Lastly, do not forget to subscribe to the channel so we can continue to walk this path together, exploring deeper, more human stories about life and how to live it well. Old age is a gift so open it with a clear mind and a heart that knows how to love yourself the right way.